Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Hello everybody, Peter Maliaris here. Welcome to another episode of the Talking Tendons podcast. Today I'm going to be talking about technology. I'm very inspired by a book that I'm reading, and I'll get into that in a second, but first I just want to give a shameless plug to our blog, which you can find at tendinopathy.rehab.com, where you'll find lots of free blogs about all things related to tendinopathy, and you'll also find the Mastering Lower Limb Tendinopathy course there, which is an online course. So have a look at that if you haven't, and please subscribe to the blog and subscribe to the podcast and give us your feedback. Would love to hear from you. So basically today is about how to use technology. That's going to be way too broad. It's more about a couple of technology papers or technology linked papers that I have been reading and found interesting over the week. I hope you find interesting too. So again, we're going to stick to 10 minutes for our usual format for our Talking Tendons podcast. So let's get into it. I've been reading a book, The Patient Will See You Now, by Dr. Eric Topol. People have probably heard of it. It's a really, really interesting read. I've found it fascinating. He talks all about technology and how technology is at the verge of revolutionizing medicine and health industry and healthcare as we know it. So there's some really interesting stuff about biosensors and real-time tracking of, various physiological markers and bloods and other things that will be able to allow us to be much better at diagnosis and early diagnosis and prevention. Obviously, there's a long way to go in many areas in understanding the data. There's more data. We've got more data than we've ever had, but it really is a case of applying it and understanding it. But very, 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 very exciting and very good read. He also talks about telerehabilitation, which is something that we're into here at Monash University, and we're looking at some novel uses of telerehabilitation with some funded and unfunded studies. So that was the inspiration, and then I came across these couple of papers, and I thought it would make a nice podcast. So here we go. The first one is from Collado Mateo. I hope I'm saying that right, but I'm pretty sure I'm not. D. Collado Mateo, and these guys are out of Spain and Chile and Uruguay, so it's quite an international array of authors. And the title of their paper is The Effect of Exergames on Musculoskeletal Pain, a Systematic Review and Meta-Analysis, published in Scandinavian Journal of Medicine and Science in Sport. So this pricked up my interest. And basically, what they've talked about is how digital gaming systems are able to get people exercising basically without them knowing they're doing anything difficult. Much more fun, much more enjoyable, and then they've talked about the different systems, so things like Nintendo Wii and Microsoft Kinect and PlayStation iToys, which I have never, I must admit, been into in a very big way, but I'm starting to now that I've got a 6-year-old son. But the potential of these exergames is really quite obvious, and that is that people can, I think the biggest area is increasing compliance in people, because they're actually exercising and exerting physical activity without actually realizing that they are, i.e. not doing their boring old exercises that we give them. So the main objective of the study was to systematically review the scientific literature about exergames interventions and their effect on musculoskeletal pain. They did a pretty comprehensive search of multiple relevant databases, and they looked at including studies that actually looked at exergames, and then they looked at the Pedro scale to assess the quality of the papers, and they looked at the grade assessment of overall quality. And so basically they have then, moving on to what they found only 6 papers. That's one of the limitations. They only found 6 papers that looked at exergames versus control on some sort of pain, musculoskeletal pain outcome. And it's fair to say there's very heterogeneous papers. So some look at low back pain, some look at ankles, ankle injuries. There's really heterogeneous conditions. Some are just adult outpatients with total knee replacements. There's cognitively intact residents of a long-term care facility with upper extremity dysfunction. So very heterogeneous conditions, and also very heterogeneous interventions. So some do standard exercise programs. Bowling, for example. Some do postural control and balance activities. Some do wakeboarding, frisbee dog, whatever that is, jet ski and canoe games. You can probably use your imagination with some of those. I'm showing my lack of knowledge of these types of games, but really they sound fun, and they compare these to some sort of control. Now, what did they find? Now, remember, there's only 6 studies here, but the headline and the takeaway from this is that there's nothing in it, really. So if you look at the meta-analysis, and they have, which probably isn't a good idea to meta-analyze studies that are so heterogeneous, but they have done it. And I think 5 out of the 6 show nothing, so no significant effect between the groups, and 1 study does have quite a large effect favouring the exergame group. So not much in it there. The authors go on to say that one remarkable thing is that they compared it to exercise. So it's exercise versus exercise rather than just a wait and see. And that's probably why it's washed out. But I don't know if I buy that, because you want to know if these exergames are better than the standard usual care. It's the same argument as we know from testing new drugs. You want to know if the drugs are better than basically whatever's been offered at the moment, rather than just some effect at all over control. So that's that one. I think there's much more to come in that space, because I do think there's benefit. Adherence is one, so maybe longer term outcomes, looking at adherence as well, which really wasn't a big focus in some of these studies. And most of these outcomes were relatively short from memory. They basically go for 8-12 weeks, but adherence long term I think is a big area. All right, look, we're at 8 minutes, so we're almost there actually. So what I want to do is just briefly mention this other study, and I think it's important too, guys, because this is a really interesting paper, and I think a really important paper, and it really flows on well with our technology theme, inspired by The Patient Will See You Now by Eric Topol. So the title of the paper is Wearable Inertial Sensor Systems for Lower Limb Exercise Detection, Evaluation and Systematic Review. Lead author Martin O'Reilly, published in Sports Medicine, and basically hot off the press. So I'm just going to really just go over this briefly. Basically what they are looking at is wearable IMUs, which is inertial measurement units. So these are basically accelerometers, gyroscopes, things like that. You can buy them for $50. Actually, I recently just bought one for about $30, so even cheaper than that. Your smartphone will have them. They're pretty easily accessible, and there's a lot of promise for measuring range of motion, for measuring quality of movement, for detecting movement, monitoring exercise, etc. So what these guys basically did is review that literature, and what they found is that they're pretty valid in measuring range of motion compared to things like goniometers. they're reasonably good when you compare them to force plates for measuring things like vertical force and reactive strength index, etc. But not as much around that area has been done. But the things that really interested me were exercise detection systems. So they have been there's people starting to use them for creating, say, automated exercise logbooks. So logging exercise in an automated way, which I think would be really useful for not only trials but also clinical practice. So these applications are starting to be used. So basically what this would do would be to use machine learning algorithms effectively to sense when somebody's doing a certain repetition of a certain exercise. You can then go on from there, and this is the next stage and the next part of their review, where they look at movement classification. So going on from, yes, are they doing the exercise, how many reps and sets, what is the quality of that? So looking at tempo would be really interesting. A lot of these studies look at whether they've performed it with the correct technique. So monitoring, or in terms of monitoring, I guess you could say, dosage, but also monitoring the quality of exercise execution, which has really obvious benefits and potential for clinical and for research use. So at the moment, I'm looking at how we can integrate some of these technologies into some of the research that we're doing, but also clinical practice. I'm not aware of use of these apps that can do these things at the moment, or any apps that are available. If anyone knows of any, please email me. I'd be really interested to know. I've actually just emailed the lead author of this paper, Martin O'Reilly, to ask him that exact question. I'll let you know if there are any available. I'll add them to the notes of this podcast, so then everyone has access, and hopefully we can just share everything. It would be great to know that other people are listening, and other people are someone's listening to this podcast somewhere. That would be great, and also willing to share and engage. Thanks very much, guys. I've talked for longer than I should have, as usual, so I'll leave it there. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.
Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to AuscastNetwork.com for details.